And my name is Bart McDonough. I'm founder and CEO of Agio. I'm going to walk you through some slides here in just a second, really that are, the first value at Agio is we call it master the fundamentals. And so before we really dive into the cyber and risk implications of AI, what I want to do is just make some definitions, define some activities. There's a lot of terms being thrown around that people don't quite understand. I think everyone knows the meteoric rise of NVIDIA, but do you know why? Like what's the role they play? I was going through this content and even these slides that I have, we could probably spend 3 to 4 hours on them and still have room. So I'm going to go quick. This content we're happy to share with you. Reach out to us. My email address is bart@agio.com. We're happy to share with you. But let's dive into the content. Again, I'm going to walk us through kind of what AI is, what LLMs are, and then we're going to talk about kind of the risks vis-a-vis cybersecurity and AI. In addition to CyberSmart, I've also published a book called Cyber Guardians. The CyberSmart book is a little bit more for the working professional. Cyber Guardians is a little bit more for board members. We do a lot of work with private equity firms, and so they sit on a lot of boards. And so we wanted to give them kind of a toolkit, if you will, on how to think about cybersecurity from a board position. So who we are, very brief. We are a managed IT cybersecurity firm focusing on financial services. Prior to starting Agio in 2010, I worked at the hedge fund SAC Capital. Many of you have probably heard of it, run by Steve Cohen. Spent there about 9 years and then launched Agio. We work with a lot of financial services firms, from hedge funds, private equity, RIAs, everyone kind of in the ecosystem. And we do a variety of IT and cybersecurity services, from help desks and network to penetration testing to governance activities, the whole thing. I give you all that. It's not really a sales pitch. If you want to work with us, we're certainly interested in the conversation. I give you all that to give you a little bit more of a background of where I'm coming from. When I have stories, when I have anecdotes, you'll know a bit more about where I'm coming from. So let's start with AI. In my kind of professional career, spanning on 20 plus years, I'll just say that, there's been some big cycles, tech cycles, some big tech innovations, all the way from the internet to mobile and crypto and metaverse and all these things. AI is the latest. The reality is some of those were big hits and some of those were missed. Is this hype or is it real? Right? The headlines are covered right now in AI. You can't kind of avoid it. These things are real, where people at the diner are asking you about AI, or you're overhearing conversations in places where you might not hear about investing or technology. AI is permeating all those areas. Here's what I'll say. There are skeptics that said, come on, we're just going to sit this out. This is just a hype. You've even seen that, stuff in the stock market, that the AI hype is over and we're back to normal. I would say that there in the last, kind of call it 10 years, there was the metaverse hype. Lots of activity. Facebook changed their name to Meta. It was all about the metaverse. Then we've had crypto. And I'm going to talk about crypto more as utility, not as an investment. So caution there. I think both of these were hype. You might disagree, and maybe I have a shorter view. I think these are a little bit more hype. The reality is, on AI, if you are a skeptic, you came to the opposite. I am such a believer on the impact it's going to have in all of our lives, in pretty much everything we do. So I'll walk you through that. Now, that doesn't mean all of it's good, right? And if we look through history, even in the last 200 years all major technology innovations have come with some positive and with negative. AI will be no different. In fact, because there's such leverage with AI, high leverage, I actually think you're going to get tremendous benefit, such as wonderful curing of diseases rapidly, but you're also going to get some really bad, high impact activities. I want to talk to you about those so you can prepare in the short term, right? I just took a look at the last 3 years. By January 23, right after ChatGPT, huge increase. By kind of this time ish last year, we had huge adoption in AI from the enterprise. Think about the kind of S&P 500 type companies, and now we're seeing consumers, whether you know it or not. So many of your interactions with businesses are have some AI assistance. I'm sure you've all been to a fast food restaurant, seeing the back end. I'm sure you've been ordering all the recommendations now. All of this is really powered by AI. Any kind of consumer support, technical support is almost all assisted by AI now. It's not going anywhere. I could have shown 10 different examples of these. This is one that's somewhat new for those that are following the kind of mad AI arms race. You'll know that there is a lot being done right now in the model development world. We talk about these as frontier models, and they're getting faster, bigger, cheaper. Right? That's kind of the takeaway. They also, and this is where I think things are going, and I included this. This was actually just released yesterday. Um, when we talk about AI agents, it's the ability for some AI to run autonomously and go and accomplish a task. I think most of us are used to working with ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, and you ask it a question or some kind of query, and it comes back and gives you one. These kind of agents do extensive amount of work, multiple iterations. They answer their own questions and go out and try to solve the task at hand. The bottom line is these things are getting tremendously more powerful and effective. As I said, some of it's for the better. There's all kinds of stats. This is from an MIT on the left, showing the kind of real evidence about how we're going to get productivity increases. But on the right, this was Dark Reading. Darkreading.com is a popular cybersecurity publication, and they're constantly publishing how AI is being used by the bad actors. I'm going to circle back to that towards the end of this, but it's really for better and for worse. I've written a large article on kind of this asymmetrical impact. I think bad actors have a real upper hand right now in the world of cybersecurity, but I think that's going to kind of reach an equilibrium here soon. Let's dive into some of the fundamentals. I want to introduce a couple of concepts to you because I think they're important. These are some definitions. When I talk about AI, I'm really referring to generative AI. When I talk about models, I'm usually talking about these LLMs or large language models. OpenAI, they are one of the biggest players in this space. They're the makers of ChatGPT, but there's other applications that people are interfacing with. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Grok, DeepSeek, Mistral. There's a lot out there. They're all the kind of popular generative AI apps. So they're the apps that sit on top of the models. Just some NVIDIA, they're the hardware, and actually it should say hardware and software used to train and build these large models. They're also producing some of their own computers now, in addition to just the chips. And obviously, you've seen what they've done. I shouldn't have to explain to this audience what they've done in terms of the market and their overall market cap. I think they're the most valuable company in the world right now, if not number two. The term prompt, when I talk about prompt, that's the way we interact with these models. It can be nothing more than a question or a statement, a demand, a request, however you want to kind of phrase that. But it's the way we interact. It's the input into the model, which then provides us some output. It's the input that then the model generates something. That's why we call them generative AI. Two terms down here: temperature and hallucination. I want to talk about because they definitely relate to the efficacy of these models and also the risk of these models. So let's just I put this in here as a point. I'm mainly going to talk about text generation models today. There is a tremendous amount of models doing things around images and videos, um, uh, drug manufacturing, drug formulation, medical imaging, all kinds, right? 3D. I'm really going to focus on the text based models here. So before we go there, let me just spend a second talking about one of the real underlying technologies of models of AI. And I think this might help you connect the dots when you hear some of the conversation about AI. So if you think about how you learn, and I've picked this example of a junior analyst, kind of day one out of college, they go work at some firm that is, maybe it's a research firm and they need to make recommendations on stocks, right? And so, how do they learn, right? Well, day one, they see all these values, and I put some things in here: growth rates and PE ratios and debt levels, maybe interest rates, whatever, right? And they don't really know how that goes together. And the way they know how it goes together is they learn. There's a lot of experience, right? There's some trial and error, and then as they get experience, they start pulling together some connections and it becomes secondhand that, oh, growth rate, that metric is really important in tech companies. But debt levels might be really critical when you have high rates, right? And they get this after just a lot of experience. That's why when we hire, we like to hire people who have experience. Well, what does that look like? And what's generated here? If you hear the term neural networks and how they're going to change the world and they're the future, and these have been around for a while, but because of NVIDIA and other kind of techniques, inventions, the use of neural networks has really exploded. So what you're seeing here is a very simplified neural network. On the left-hand side, there would be the inputs. And then you see these lines, and you might think I just did a sloppy graph here and I have, different thicknesses. But what's happening here is these are the weights. These are the importance. That the thickness of that line is telling you the importance. So let's just say this was a tech company during a time of low interest rates. And maybe these values would be the ones that would be most predictive to make a buy and sell decision. So when you think about when you hear these comments that like so and so Meta, for example, has made their AI open source. Well, what actually is open source? So each of the thicknesses of those lines represents a value, and we call those weights. We're weighting the relative importance, the relative um, connective, like the measure of the connective tissue to get that final result. And so this is a real simplified example, but this is what's happening. And each of those dots, consider that a parameter. We're talking about ones that have hundreds of billions of parameters in there, ChatGPT and Gemini and Grok and all of those. And they're learning those from a lot of repetition. So then you have this model. And by the way, these models are kind of like a single file. There's actually not, once you train the model, you just get these models with these weights. It's kind of simple in some regard. But then when you want to interact with that model, you have various settings. So there's something called temperature. And for this example, we're going to say temperature goes from 0 to 1. There's some iterations of this now where it goes from 0 to 2. But in this example, it's 0 to 1. Think about temperature as a level of creativity. Okay. And so you have very low temperature. And what I did here, and this is a real example, is I asked it the question, you'll see at the top, whoops, it said it was a sunny day at the park. And then I wanted it to finish the sentence, right? And so what you'll see here in this first one, it came back with a very low temperature, low creativity. Sunny day at the park with children playing on the swings and families picnicking on the grass, blah, 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 right? Very straightforward. Very plausible, right? At a medium temperature, you can see it was sunny where the old man was feeding the birds, blah, 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 the scent of blooming flowers. We start still makes sense, right? But it gets a little bit more detailed, a little bit more vibrant. And then look at this high temperature, right? It was a sign of the part, and the squirrels were hosting a chess tournament. The roses were humming, pop tunes, right? You get this super creative area. And so why does this matter? Why am I telling you about this temperature setting? Well, one, sometimes when you use Copilot, for example, by Microsoft, they'll have a creativity setting. Underneath this, you're setting the temperature. So this is OpenAI's playground where you can set the temperature. In this example, this is where they took it to 2, but it's simply just a 0 to 1, 0 to 2 kind of setting. So I want you to ask yourself from a business standpoint, why would you ever want really creative, right? That sounds dangerous, right? It could talk about squirrels playing chess. And then but more predictive. Well, think about if you were doing an analysis, if you sent it a bunch of data and you wanted it to get really creative, you wanted it to think differently, you wanted it to perhaps find some connections that you hadn't seen before. If you set it at a very low temperature, it's not going to do that. It's going to see the patterns that it's always seen. It's going to be the low creative. When you set these very high, it's going to actually start finding some connections. So even in the like I've mentioned drug formulation a bunch, that's where you want high creativity. You want it to look for connections that maybe have never existed before. Now, there's danger here, right? So there's a related risk here of a hallucination. And a hallucination is when it says something that sounds plausible, but it's actually incorrect or completely nonsensical, right? And there's some examples here in here. And I give you these definitions because they are related but simple. The higher temperature, the more likely you are to get a hallucination. But a super high temperature does not mean that it's going to hallucinate. But you almost want it to hallucinate in sometimes. Imagine you asked LLM to write you a song for a partner, for a friend, a poem, a card. You might want ultra creativity. But maybe if you're writing a letter to a business colleague, maybe you don't. You want straightforward. You say, I want to convey these points. Write me a letter, and maybe you don't want it mentioning squirrels playing chess, right? So these are a couple of topics that I think are important. When we get to risks here in just a second, you'll kind of see where I'm connecting the dots there. I think most of you probably know this, but for completeness, I wanted to put some of the popular use cases for LLMs, ChatGPT. You'll see here, I have these big categories of content generation, content summarization, right? And then sentiment analysis. Really important. Other things that it does quite well, any language translation, code generation. I can't tell you the advances there. If you're not a software developer of any kind, take my word for it. There is just a tremendous amount of benefit from code, from design to implementation. Data analysis, some really great progress there. And then image and graphic. I told you we're going to stick to text here, but make no mistake, there's going to be full-length feature-length films fully generated from text that will generate movies, shows. Certainly, there's already commercials being made that way. Some things I want you to avoid, we'll talk about this a bit more, is careful with that first output. Don't use client data, let's be obvious. And then there's sometimes kind of ethical decision making. AI can be very cut and dry. If you want a second opinion, you want to bounce something off to see it, it can be a good, but be careful with it. Okay, that's kind of the section where I wanted to give some definitions, right? I wanted to back into this so that everyone kind of knows what we're talking about. Again, some of these topics I could have spent hours on. Now we're going to pivot into risks. And I think about risk in two ways. There's these internal risks and the external ones. Let's start with internal. So we're not talking about hackers. We're not talking about existential risks like, um, you know, everyone's going to be unemployed in 2 years. Right now, we're going to be very much more practical. We're going to talk about the internal localized risks that you expose yourself to through the use of Gen AI. Okay. And I categorize these in two: the input risk and output risk. So, what I mean by that, the data you put into AI. So, that's the input. And some ways that, when you put data in, there is really can be some challenging um, um, uh, outputs from that, right? You might need to buy your own instance. You might need to obfuscate your data. You might, but the cheapest, the best is to opt out of relearnings. Okay, output risk. There was a lawyer that had AI write a brief for him, and he submitted it to the court and did not read it. Well, AI hallucinated some of the references and cited some cases that never existed. He submitted that and was actually charged with contempt of court because he just lied in his document, right? AI generated it, so he said AI did it, but he was responsible for it. So this is where we want to be really, really aware about uh, uh, um, um, about that output. Okay, let me just external risks. There's a lot here. I think and I'm going to go through some of these slides a little quickly, but organizations are facing this three-front battle. Um, and this is where I think about it. Regulators are getting really busy with AI and the related kind of cyber regulations all around them. AI is enabling bad actors to get faster and better. And then all while this is happening, what we call in the cyber world IT surface area or your technology surface area. And just simply put, think about your own life, your family. How many devices did you have connected to the internet 5 years ago, 10 years ago, compared to what you have today? That's surface area, right? There's just more. How many systems did you have? How many different portals did you log into? How many different accounts did you have, right? There's been an explosion, right? All of that is this three-front battle. Think about it in purely military terms. If you have a lot more land to defend, it's harder versus you have this very narrow, very focused area. You can defend that better, right? Imagine you have the same resources trying to defend massive amounts of land or a very small amount of land. Um, Lots of regulation here. I just want to double check. I got a message that said it's only 30 minutes, but I thought I had 50 minutes. So someone chat me here and tell me if I'm ending at 11:30 or if I'm ending at 11:50. Because I can do either. As I said, there's hours of content here. Just while we're waiting on that answer to come in, let me check. Let me just keep going on the kind of cyber regulatory environment. The SEC is very active already on AI and cyber. So these are three cases. This is all within the last 12 months around misleading statements about AI, about kind of AI washing, overusing it, underusing it, relative. And then the SEC, in their examinations of advisors, is actually starting to ask questions about AI. And we have some examples of it. So this is a recent SEC exam. I've highlighted some of the stuff they want to know about AI disclosures and marketing, data sources used. These are big. What's your documentation on data security measures when using AI? These are real questions. This is an actual screenshot from an SEC exam of a firm. So it is wrapping up 11:30. So let me make sure. I want to get some questions answered here. So let me just jump to questions. As I said, gang, there is so much we could cover on this. There is just so much activity going on around tech, cyber, AI, all of it. There's been some really good, let me just double check questions. A question came in. How much of our daily lives are already influenced by AI without us realizing it? I would tell you probably 80% of all the interactions you have with a company have some AI assistance to them right now. And by the end of the year, that could be as high as 90%. And it's going to start, you know, driving down. So lots and like tons of content here. Happy to answer more questions. Like I said, my contact information is bart@agio.com. Feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to share any of this content with you. Lots and lots there. So let me just pause there and see if there's any other questions.